Hey y'all, it's Megan, and we are sewing up a Carissa dress today with the lace back bodice. I also have a video showing the solid back in the crop option, and I will leave that linked down below if you want to watch that video. The first step is going to be to sew the front bodice. So you're going to put your two center front pieces right sides together, and you're going to stitch them along the center with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You do want to use your sewing machine for piecing your front bodice together. And then once you have it sewn, you are going to press the seam toward one side, and then you're going to top stitch it in place just a scant 1/2 inch from the first stitch line. Then you're going to take your center bodice and you're going to align it with one side front bodice, and using that marking on your side front bodice, you're going to align that top of the center panel to the side bodice. Again, stitching it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to press that seam towards your center panel and top stitch it in place. Then you're going to repeat all of those steps with the other front side bodice, matching the center to the front side piece, aligning that marking with the top of the center bodice, and then pressing that seam toward the center and top stitching it in place. Once you have the front piece all together, then the next step is going to be to sew the shoulder seams. So you're going to place the front and back shoulders right sides together and stitch them along each shoulder. And you're going to repeat that step with the lining pieces. Go ahead and set your bodice aside for a minute and take your loop and tie pieces. You are going to press them in half right sides together, and you're going to sew along the long edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You're going to do this on the tie piece and also the loop piece. Once you have them sewn together, you are going to use a tube turner or a safety pin, and you are going to turn the tie and loop pieces right sides out and give it a nice press. With your loop piece, you are going to cut it into 10 pieces that are about 2 inches long, and you're going to fold those loops in half and pin them in place on the markings on your back bodices. Once you have all of the loops pinned in place, you should have 5 on each back bodice. Then you're just going to baste them in place quickly along the back edge, about a 1/4 inch from the back bodice edge. Then it's time to attach our lining. So you're going to place your lining and main pieces right sides together, and you're going to sew the lining to the main piece along the back edges and the front neckline. I do like to use my sewing machine for this step so I get a nice clean finish, especially on that front square neckline. So I will sew it with my sewing machine first, and then I will clip through but not to the seam allowance at the corners of my neckline, and then run it through my serger once I do that. Then you want to give it a good press and press the lining toward the wrong side of the bodice, and you're going to under stitch on the lining side so that the lining does not poke out while you're wearing it. Then I like to quickly create a memory press on the edge of my hem by pressing a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side, and then sew your sleeves to your bodice, and there are notches that will match on your front sleeve and front bodice and back sleeve and back bodice. You will stitch the sleeves with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, And then we are going to stitch our side seams. So place your front and back bodice right sides together and stitch the bodice from the sleeve edge all the way down to the edge of your bodice with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Set that bodice aside while we work on our skirt. I'm doing the paneled skirt option, so I am placing my 2 front center skirt pieces right sides together and stitching them at the center with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, just like the front bodice with this paneled skirt, you do want to use your sewing machine because you're going to press the seam toward one side and then top stitch it in place, just like we did with our front bodice. And you do want to make sure that you're pressing and stitching the same direction so that when we put our skirt together with our bodice, that everything aligns and matches up. Then you're going to sew your side front skirt to the center front, and I'm doing the slit option here. So if you're doing that too, you want to make sure to mark that slit height, and you're just going to sew, you can see my slit height right there, to that marking. You are using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to press that seam toward the center, and you're going to press the unstitched edge just like this, a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side. And you are going to top stitch that pressed seam in place. And you're just going to continue stitching down past the slit so you hem the edge, and you will go back and hem the other side of your slit as well by stitching a scant 1/2 inch from the edge. Once that side is sewn, you will attach the other side front skirt to the center front skirt. If you are doing another slit, then just go to the slit marking, or if you're just doing one slit, go ahead and sew that all the way up with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then again, press it toward the center seam and top stitch it in place. And then your front skirt is all complete. Once your front skirt is done, you are going to sew it to the back skirt, aligning the raw edges and side, and stitch them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, creating those side seams. Then it is time to attach the bodice to the skirt. I do like to baste together the bottom of your lace back just so it doesn't move, and then you are going to pin that bodice in place, matching all of the paneled seams and side seam. And you are going to, I like to baste it in place real quick with my sewing machine to make sure that all of the seams are going to match up, and then use my serger to sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Remove any basting stitches, and then it's time to hem the sleeves and the skirt by pressing a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side and edge stitching in place. Then all you need to do is take your tie and slip it through the loops. You can tie a knot at the end of your ties and trim them if you'd like. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below and I will try to answer them. As always, if you sew up anything using the Carissa pattern, we would love to see them posted in our Facebook group, or tag us on Instagram at Made for Mermaids, hashtag Made for Mermaids Patterns, hashtag Carissa Pattern. See you next time. Bye.